Sam Whitaker's morning routine is interrupted by the faint sound of wind chimes, soft instrumental music, and something that smells suspiciously like lavender oil. The sun had just cleared the ridge, casting long amber lines across the dry brush and tilled soil of Sam's modest farm. Birds rustled in the Palo Verde trees, and a chorus of sleepy grunts came from the goat pen as Sam unlatched the gate. His boots crunched along the gravel path with comforting weight, and steam curled lazily from the chipped enamel mug in his hand. The coffee inside was strong, black, and exactly how he liked it. He set it on a fence post beside the feed bucket and reached for the grain scoop. The radio on the porch sputtered through the forecast. Hot and dry today in Saguaro Ridge, low 90s by mid-afternoon, perfect for getting some chores done before noon. Sam gave a slow nod to no one in particular, then turned to the chickens, whose clucks had grown more insistent. It wasn't until the second scoop of grain hit the trough that something odd slipped into the morning. A faint chime. Not a bell from the barn or the jangle of Honker's metal tag. This was softer, lighter. It was followed by the low murmur of voices and a faint melodic hum that didn't belong on a working farm. Sam frowned. Then came the scent. Lavender. And not from his garden, which he hadn't watered in 3 days. The sound of a familiar engine brought his attention to the driveway. Luis pulled up in his dusty Toyota, stepped out, and raised an eyebrow as he caught the same odd perfume drifting across the field. "You spray something new, boss?" he asked, sniffing dramatically. "Smells like a spa blew up near the barn." Sam wiped his hands on his jeans. "Not me." Luis squinted toward the back pasture. "You hear music?" They followed the sound, boots moving with purpose over worn paths. The breeze carried soft, soothing instrumental notes, flutes, maybe some gentle strumming, and then a voice. Inhale gratitude. Exhale expectation. Sam slowed as they approached the clearing just beyond the barn, the one he'd mowed last week. It was no longer a bare, open field. Dozens of white tents were staked into the ground, like a pop-up festival. Pastel yoga mats were arranged in precise lines. A long folding table bore pitchers of fruit-infused water and neat rows of what looked like herbal snacks. A kombucha bar had been set up beside a portable DJ booth. Soft instrumental music floated from hidden speakers, nestled among succulents. At the center stood a woman in flowing linen, her arms raised as if greeting the dawn. Sam stopped dead. What the hell? Luis let out a low whistle. She did not. At the front of the gathering, a vinyl banner flapped gently in the breeze. It read, "Mindful Mornings with Meredith, sponsored by the HOA." The name hit Sam like a bad flashback. For the past few weeks, he'd been getting glossy flyers in his mailbox. All of them featured Meredith Langford in some dramatic yoga pose, usually atop a rock or in front of a saguaro cactus, framed by inspirational quotes like, "Structure is serenity." He had thrown them all away. But now she was here, on his land. "I didn't sign up for this," Sam muttered, jaw tightening. They crossed the line from gravel to manicured grass. One of the yogis, a woman in a tie-dye tank top, gave them a placid smile and a small bow as they passed. Meredith, perched near the front with arms extended, caught sight of Sam and beamed. "There you are," she said brightly, lowering her hands. "I was wondering when you'd come say hi." Sam blinked. "Meredith?" She glided toward him like she was still in slow-motion flow. Her linen outfit caught the morning light, and a small headset microphone looped behind her ear. "I knew you wouldn't mind," she said, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. "This is technically a shared space, and the HOA bylaws, Section 12, Clause B, support wellness events for community engagement." Sam's eyes narrowed. "This is my land." "Of course," she chirped, undeterred. And what better setting for a restorative retreat than this gorgeous backdrop? Honestly, you should feel honored. You're bringing the neighborhood together. Luis snorted behind him. Sam didn't speak right away. His gaze swept the scene, the tents, the branded mats, the elderly couple trying to balance in tree pose near his irrigation hose. He turned back to Meredith. "You set this up without asking me." She gave him a practiced smile. "Well, we sent out a community notification. You probably missed the email. These things happen." Luis stepped forward. "And the sound system? The catering truck?" "HOA funds well spent," she said with pride. "Community bonding is priceless." Sam folded his arms, taking a slow breath. The lavender oil in the air was starting to give him a headache. His goats were unsettled by the noise, and Sergeant Honkers had been pacing along the fence line like a sentry on high alert. He nodded once, then turned to Luis. "This ain't going to end with just deep breaths and herbal tea." "I don't recall ever signing over my land to the HOA," Sam says, arms folded, as Meredith demonstrates a yoga pose to her crowd. The mid-morning sun had begun to stretch its fingers across the farm, heating the packed dirt and casting short, sharp shadows beneath the white yoga tents. The sweet herbal scent from the wellness table clashed awkwardly with the musk of barn hay and livestock. Sam stood still, a quiet pillar of resistance in a sea of pastel yoga mats and camera phones. Meredith, perched in Warrior 2, lifted her chin with theatrical grace, ignoring Sam's stance. "It's a community activation," she said, her voice floating through the microphone attached to her headset. "The HOA has every right to encourage collective healing." Her fingers extended toward the sky like she was summoning serenity from thin air. Luis, standing off to the side near the feed bins, shook his head. "Pretty sure healing doesn't involve commandeering someone's backyard." Meredith straightened and pivoted, palms pressed together. "Sam," she said, stepping closer, "this retreat isn't about ownership. It's about openness. This space, your land, has so much potential to uplift others. Don't you want to be part of something bigger than yourself?" "I'm already part of something," Sam said. "It's called my farm, and you're on it." She laughed, light, airy, the kind of laugh that didn't come with real humor. "Let's not split hairs. We sent the announcement weeks ago. You really ought to check your email more often." Luis narrowed his eyes. "The one about the Mindful Community Engagement Fund? My neighbor said it was going to be used for benches near the dog park." Meredith turned her megawatt smile toward him. "Plans evolved," she said breezily. "We had such great turnout interest, over 50 RSVPs, and the HOA board supported the reallocation. Community consensus." Sam didn't respond. His eyes scanned the crowd. There were young couples in branded athletic wear, a few older residents perched uncomfortably on folding stools, and several smartphone-wielding attendees snapping photos of potted succulents beside motivational quote signs. Mr. Bill stood at the fringe, arms crossed, a hat pulled low over his forehead. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. But he didn't leave, either. "I'm going inside," Sam said. His tone was low but resolute. Meredith took a step forward. "Sam, please, don't make this a thing. We're promoting wellness. You should try a class, maybe something gentle, restorative poses for beginners." He didn't answer. Back in the farmhouse, the cool dimness was a welcome contrast. Sam dropped his hat on the kitchen table and sat in front of his old laptop. The fans whirred to life. He clicked through folders until he found the feed from the security camera mounted near the north fence, one Meredith likely hadn't noticed. Luis slipped in behind him a minute later, wiping sweat from his neck. "She's got the gall of a rattler sunning on your porch." "Let's see just how deep it goes," Sam murmured. He fast-forwarded through an hour of footage, pausing when Meredith appeared on screen late the previous afternoon. She stood near the gate, phone tucked under one ear, clipboard in hand. Two assistants in matching yoga tanks followed behind her, setting up tape to mark tent areas. But that wasn't what made Sam sit straighter. He clicked on another file, a backup of the HOA's last virtual meeting. It had been auto-recorded when he dialed in briefly weeks ago, mostly to hear the budget updates. He hadn't paid attention at the time. Now he listened. On screen, Meredith leaned close to her webcam. "He won't say no," she told the group, voice low and confident. "He's stubborn, but let's be honest. Sam doesn't engage. He ignores our calls, never attends meetings. We'll just set up. He won't stop us. If he grumbles, we'll call it a miscommunication." The board had looked unsure, some nodding slowly, others silent. One woman raised a hand, only to be cut off by Meredith saying, "We don't have time to overthink. The permits are, let's say, in motion." Luis leaned forward. "That sounds a lot like fraud." Sam didn't speak. He reached for a flash drive from a drawer, plugged it in, and began copying the clip. The progress bar crawled forward. Outside, the music swelled again, something meditative with chimes and layered flutes. Sergeant Honkers honked once, agitated. Luis crossed his arms. "You gonna call the cops?" Sam replied, "No, not yet." As the retreat enters its deep breath segment, a rusted barn latch creaks open, followed by a distant honk and the thunder of tiny hooves. The afternoon heat hung thick over the clearing, turning the yoga mats into islands of sweaty concentration. Under white tents and fluttering fabric canopies, retreat guests sat cross-legged in the stillness portion of their guided journey, hands resting on knees, eyes closed. A speaker played soft ambient music layered with ocean waves and the call of loons, despite Arizona being bone-dry desert. Meredith stood at the front of the group, arms outstretched like a priestess before a congregation, her voice lilting through the headset mic. Breathe in community, breathe out resistance. Sam sat in the shade of a mesquite tree nearby, legs crossed, slowly chewing sunflower seeds and spitting husks into a paper cup. He didn't speak. He hadn't said much all morning, but the calm on his face wasn't serenity. It was something closer to satisfaction. Luis crouched behind the barn, fingers hovering near a thin nylon cord tied from the fence post to the old latch that held the lower barn door shut. The plan had been simple, precise, organic even. Earlier he had grinned when Sam said, "You got the animals fed?" "Fed, watered, and ready to liberate," Luis had replied, giving the cord an experimental tug. One pull, and the gates of nature open. Now, at the exact moment, Meredith began the closing affirmation. "Let your soul expand as your body softens." Luis pulled the cord. A metallic clank echoed through the heat. The barn door groaned, then swung open just enough. The first honk wasn't especially loud, but it carried like a trumpet in the still air. Sergeant Honkers, beady eyes gleaming, marched forward with wings slightly raised. Behind him thundered a half-dozen goats, 3 chickens, and a particularly irritable sheep named Janice. From his perch, Sam leaned forward and took another seed from his pouch. The animals stormed the event like it was their sacred duty. Mats flew. A shriek split the calm as the first goat leapt into the lap of a woman mid-meditation. She toppled sideways into her neighbor, who let out a cry of alarm. 2 chickens darted across the kombucha table, knocking over carafes of cucumber mint water. Janice the sheep, large and determined, shouldered through a table of hand-poured soy candles. Sergeant Honkers bypassed the chaos entirely, heading straight toward the snack station. With precision and speed, he flapped onto the table, kicked a bowl of granola into the grass, and began honking furiously at the nearest person, a young man in linen pants frozen in place with a handful of trail mix. Meredith spun around. "Everyone, please, stay grounded," she yelled into her mic. "This is just a moment of natural integration." Her voice crackled as the speaker system wobbled from its stand. Guests staggered backward, tripping over their mats and sandals, some shielding their faces from fluttering chicken feathers. Luis emerged from behind the barn, looking half apologetic, half delighted. "Oops," he said, then dodged as a goat launched itself onto a crate of rolled yoga towels. Meredith climbed atop the stage, waving her arms. "Affirmation! I need affirmation here." But her words were swallowed by the blare of distorted music. The DJ, in a panic, had hit the wrong button, and now a bass-heavy remix of whale sounds blasted across the field. And then Butterscotch arrived. The goat had a way of making entrances, and today was no different. He bounded up onto the DJ table, slipped slightly, regained his footing, and gave a bleat so loud and sudden that it silenced the crowd for half a beat. Then he danced, stamping his hooves in triumphant rhythm, knocking buttons and sliders as the music skipped, warped, and finally died. Meredith looked out over the ruins of her retreat. Her face, usually set in a mask of pleasant determination, twisted into something desperate. And then Sam stepped forward, calm, steady. He crunched through the grass toward the mess of tipped chairs, spilled water jugs, and ruined decor. Meredith turned to him as if he were the final barrier between her and total collapse. He glanced once at the broken speaker, then at Butterscotch, who gave a victorious little bleat. You forgot to center your intentions on private property rights. Behind him, Sergeant Honkers let out a final echoing honk. For a long beat, Meredith stood frozen, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping in dry air. And then, in the distance, a new sound rose, shrill and unmistakable. Sirens. They wailed across the desert road, drawing closer with every second. Meredith shrieked, voice cracking as she turned toward Sam, jabbing a finger at his chest. "You're going to jail for this." Two sheriff's deputies step over scattered yoga mats and lavender-scented candles, their boots crunching on the dry Arizona dirt. The retreat grounds looked like a battlefield dreamed up by an overzealous interior designer. Mats lay upturned, their pastel tones dulled by dust. A glass jar of herbal tea had shattered near the snack table, its remnants soaking into the sand. A speaker lay on its side, its cord tangled beneath a pile of deflated yoga balls. The last few attendees trickled toward their cars, clutching water bottles and mumbling about refunds. Sam sat on his porch with a glass of iced tea, legs stretched out, a flash drive resting on the armrest beside him, and a folded property survey tucked under his boot. Sergeant Honkers strutted nearby, pecking at a wind chime that had fallen from its hook. The patrol car slowed to a stop just beyond the gate. Deputies Carter and Mills stepped out, the heat catching their hats before their boots even touched the ground. They scanned the scene like men who'd walked into a movie set halfway through the climax. "Afternoon," Carter called out, his tone casual but alert. "Gentlemen," Sam replied, nodding once. He didn't stand. Meredith Langford intercepted them before they could take another step, flanked by one retreat assistant and a woman still dabbing eucalyptus oil onto her wrist. "I want him arrested," Meredith snapped, pointing toward Sam. "He endangered lives. There were animals, loose, charging through peaceful guests. He released them. It was an attack." Carter raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, slow down." "Assault by livestock is a real thing," she insisted, breath fast and tight. "And this was a wellness space. He ruined it." Mills took out a small notepad. "Okay, let's just hear from both sides." Sam stood up and walked down the steps, calm as ever. "You mind if I share a few items?" Meredith scoffed, turning toward the deputies. "He's going to lie." Sam handed the flash drive to Carter. "This contains a recording of the last HOA Zoom meeting. You'll want to skip to the part where Meredith says, 'We'll just set up. He won't stop us.'" Carter took the drive without comment. Sam then unfolded the survey and laid it across the hood of the patrol car. "Here's the deed. The event took place entirely on my property, outlined in red. Not shared space, not communal. My land, fence to fence. Mills adjusted his hat. Looks pretty clear. And, Sam continued, tapping a manila folder, email printouts from Meredith to HOA board members. In one of them, she claims I agreed verbally to host this retreat. I didn't. Meredith's smile had gone tight around the edges. That's subjective? No, it's documented, Sam replied. And if you want to call my voicemail history or subpoena my call logs, you'll find I never answered a single outreach from the HOA on this. Louise stood back near the fence, phone in hand, casually recording. Mr. Bill appeared on the other side of the fence line, leaning with arms crossed, watching in silence. Carter glanced between Meredith and the evidence on the hood of the car. "Ma'am," he said, tone now a shade more formal, "do you have written permission from Mr. Whitaker to use this land?" "I had implied consent," Meredith replied. "We're neighbors. He's always so reclusive, I thought." Mills interrupted. "But did you have written consent?" She hesitated. "Number but, I informed the HOA board." Sam stepped back, letting the stillness do its work. The wind picked up just slightly, rustling the remains of a yoga pamphlet near the porch steps. Carter exhaled. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us to clarify a few things at the station." Meredith's face contorted, halfway between disbelief and rage. "Are you serious? He's the one who released animals." Sam met her eyes. "On my land that you occupied without consent." "No one was hurt," Louise added helpfully. "Except the kombucha. It didn't make it." Mr. Bill snorted. As Carter gently gestured toward the patrol car, Meredith began muttering under her breath, something about reputations and litigation. But she complied, perhaps sensing that making a scene would only dig her hole deeper. She climbed into the car with stiff shoulders and clenched fists. Sam turned, walked back to the porch, and reclaimed his glass of tea. He sipped once, just as the door shut behind Meredith with a heavy finality. Guests who had earlier smiled for yoga selfies now avoided his gaze, ducking their heads as they made their way down the dusty road. A few peeled off toward Mr. Bill, murmuring in low voices. After a long moment, Mr. Bill stepped closer and rested his arms on the fence. He didn't speak right away. Then, with a small glance toward the patrol car pulling away, he leaned toward Sam and said, "You might want to stop by the HOA clubhouse tonight. I hear they're finally ready to talk." The HOA clubhouse has never been this full or this quiet. Folding chairs scraped against linoleum as neighbors shuffled into rows, murmuring behind styrofoam cups of lemon water. The air was thick with awkward tension, made heavier by the evening heat, clinging to their shirts and sandals. Fluorescent ceiling lights buzzed faintly overhead. A vinyl banner hung askew near the front, its message now unintentionally ironic. Serenity through structure. Sam sat near the back wall, arms folded, legs stretched slightly forward. He wasn't here to speak. He'd been asked, sure, but he preferred to listen. Mr. Bill stood near the front, a yellow folder tucked beneath his arm, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. He hadn't spoken much in years, not beyond weather comments and fence line updates, but tonight his silence had finally worn thin. The head of the board, a mild man named Ed, cleared his throat and opened the meeting. "We appreciate everyone coming. As you all know, Meredith Langford is currently unavailable to join us. We're here to discuss recent events, specifically the use of HOA funds and property rights." A few nods, a few arms crossed. Mr. Bill raised his hand. Ed looked surprised, then nodded. "Go ahead, Bill." Bill stepped up and unfolded the yellow folder, spreading a few papers on the front table. "This," he said, tapping a page, "is the last HOA financial report. You'll notice a new line item. Community Wellness Activation, $4,762.88. That covers the kombucha bar, the tent rentals, the DJ, and the organic kale salad, which, by the way, no one touched. A light ripple of uncomfortable laughter. Bill continued, voice steady. I never voted for that retreat, neither did most of you. Meredith told us Sam had approved it. She said it was public land. It wasn't. A woman near the middle row raised her hand. Karen Feldman, a mother of 3 who usually left early. My dues went up last quarter, she said. Meredith said it was for dog park repairs, but I checked. The park hasn't changed in 6 months. Another voice chimed in, quieter. I thought we were using the community lawn. I didn't realize it was someone's actual backyard. From a folding table near the wall, a board member named Marcy rolled a laptop forward. May I? She asked. Ed gestured. Go ahead. Marcy clicked a few keys. The speakers crackled before playing a clip. Meredith's face lit up on the screen, eyebrows raised in amusement. He never checks his emails. It's easier to beg forgiveness than ask permission. A few gasps, a few groans. On the screen, Meredith continued, laughing. Let's just set up. By the time he notices, we'll be mid-savasana. When the clip ended, the room fell quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence, the kind that comes right before a shift. Ed adjusted his glasses. I think we need to consider a vote. A board member in the front row stood. I move for a vote of no confidence in Meredith Langford, effective immediately. Seconded, someone called from the middle. Ed looked around. All in favor? Hands rose, fast, nearly unanimous. Even those who had hesitated earlier now lifted their palms without a word. The weight in the room lifted slightly, like an overstuffed bag finally unzipped. A few people clapped, quietly, but with feeling. Others just exhaled. Sam remained still, watching. He didn't smile, but something in his posture relaxed. Ed cleared his throat again. Per our bylaws, Vice President Margaret Hill will serve as interim president until we hold formal elections. Margaret, a soft-spoken retired librarian with silver hair and gentle eyes, stood from her folding chair. She tucked her shawl tighter and looked out over the crowd. Thank you, she said simply, and thank you, Sam, for your patience. He gave a small nod. As people began to gather their things, still murmuring, Margaret made her way to the back. She stopped beside Sam, her voice quiet but clear. We'd like to make this right. May we stop by your place in the morning? At dawn, Sam's porch smells of fresh earth and cinnamon, courtesy of a surprise delivery. A light breeze swept through the canyon, rustling the brittle edges of mesquite leaves and carrying with it the smell of morning dew warming on the soil. The sun had barely breached the ridgeline, casting a honey-colored glow across the fields. The birds hadn't quite begun their chorus, and for once, even the goats were quiet. Sam stepped onto the porch with a slow stretch, rubbing the back of his neck. His boots settled with a familiar thud on the planks, and as he reached down for the mail bucket, he noticed 2 things resting beside it. A box with the unmistakable crinkle of a diner's to-go pie container and a tall thermos wrapped in a paper napkin that read, "Sorry about the lavender." He opened the pie box, apple by the looks of it, with a lattice crust that still glistened. A bite had clearly been cut with intention, a gesture that was neither desperate nor obligatory, just neighborly. Luis emerged from the barn, adjusting the strap on a feed bag slung over his shoulder. "Morning, boss," he called. "You see the peace offering?" Sam held up the thermos. "Smells like the good stuff. From Maggie's?" Luis sniffed the air. "Definitely. Cinnamon means it's fresh. You only get cinnamon if she likes you." Sam poured a bit into his enamel mug. "Then I'll take it as a sign the ceasefire's holding." Luis chuckled. "We should install goat alarms, though, just in case negotiations break down." Sam smirked, sitting on the top step. We'll train Butterscotch to read bylaws." The screen door creaked open behind them. Mr. Bill shuffled up the path, one hand holding a canvas bag, the other tipping his hat. "Heard the cleanup's almost done," he said. "Brought some wire and staples. Thought maybe I'd help fix that fence. Seemed like the neighborly thing to do." Sam gave him a nod. "Appreciate it?" They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, patching the section of fence near the western post. Mr. Bill chatted quietly about an old John Deere tractor he used to own, how it kicked harder than a mule in a thunderstorm, until he learned to ease it into gear. Luis popped his head over the fence. "Guess who's coming up the drive?" Sam stood, brushing dust off his jeans. A small group approached. Margaret Hill, now interim HOA president, along with two other neighbors Sam vaguely recognized from past mailbox encounters and mutual nods at the diner. No banners, no clipboards, just calm expressions and a folder in hand. Margaret stepped forward. "We wanted to stop by, not to talk you into anything, just to say thank you." She handed him the folder. Inside was a typed agreement, plain and clear. Sam's property was confirmed as private, exempt from any HOA-sponsored events or encroachments. The language was respectful, legal, signed by the board. "And," Margaret added, "we wanted to offer something else. Maybe just clarity, respect. That's the word we're aiming for now?" Sam looked over the paper, then back at them. "Appreciated," he said, and nodded toward the porch. "There's coffee. You're welcome to it, long as you bring your own mug next time." Margaret smiled. "Deal." The group stayed for a few minutes, chatting softly about irrigation, spring planting, and the upcoming craft fair. No one mentioned yoga or Meredith. Just as they turned to leave, a familiar waddling shape emerged from behind the rain barrel. Sergeant Honkers strutted up to the porch, wings slightly puffed. He looked each guest over, gave a solitary honk of approval, or warning, it was always hard to tell, and plopped down beside Sam's boot with a low huff, claiming his spot like a furry-footed sentry. Luis, phone in hand, let out a short laugh. "Guess what? HOA's new newsletter wants volunteers for silent brunch Sundays." Sam raised an eyebrow. "As long as they keep it their side of the fence." In the quiet morning after the storm, Sam found peace not in isolation, but in understanding, earned the hard way, and shared in a slice of pie on the porch. What was once a battle of property became a lesson in boundaries, dignity, and the slow power of standing firm. Sometimes the strongest fences aren't the ones made of wood, but the ones built on mutual respect. And like a good sunrise over familiar soil, real change often starts when neighbors finally look each other in the eye.